You're listening to Sunny Side Up, a B2B podcast that brings you the juiciest insights from go-to-market leaders and practitioners.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sunny Side Up. I am your host, Carolyn Najac, and today I'm super excited to be here with Christian DeMarais on crafting success and navigating landscapes in business. So Christian is currently serving as Director of Revenue Operations and Strategy at Wix, where he has helped build and scale 25 sales and account management teams in 3 years. In addition to that, as a career in RevOps and sales strategy pro, Christian is also an accomplished actor who has recently had a reoccurring role in Maniac on Netflix, as well as guest roles on Mr. Robot, which you can see on USA, The Equalizer, and Elementary, both on CBS. Christian holds an MFA in acting from NYU and a BA in business management and theater with a minor in dance from Gustavus Adolphus College. So quite the background there, Christian, and I'm really excited to talk to you. I think I was joking before, but you have an amazing background, and we're really excited to have you on the show today.
That's very sweet of you to say. Thank you for the kind introduction. I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to, discuss a little bit of my background and kind of like how acting and that world sort of intersects with what I do now in the tech world and the RevOps world. I think there's a lot of commonalities there, and I just appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to talk with you. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, and I think we should just get right into it. I had alluded to a bit of your fascinating journey and your background, but I think can you walk us through, just starting with your background, how did you transition into RevOps? How did you get started? Even just in acting, would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I realized in college that I really wanted to be an actor, and I didn't necessarily pick schools based off of that. I wanted to be able to do that in college, but it's not something I necessarily thought of pursuing as a career. But I knew that I wanted to kind of also have a fail-safe if or when my acting career didn't necessarily work out. So that's why I majored in business management, as you sort of said. And that was kind of just like what people did at my school when they didn't know what they wanted to major in. They majored in business management. So did that, went to grad school for acting, and I'd sort of had pretty tunnel vision that right when I graduated from NYU, I'd have a super successful career, be working all the time, nominated for Oscar, all this stuff, which, spoiler alert, didn't happen. And that's just sort of what you learn to realize out of school, is that for a lot of us, it's inconsistent. And I've been so blessed to work with some incredible people and work on some incredible projects. But in between those things, you have to make money and you have to like fill your time and be able to afford to live in New York City. So I was nannying, I was walking dogs, I was the gig economy, working in that industry. And it was like really taxing, also difficult, especially when it comes to like childcare, of needing to like bail randomly for certain auditions in the middle of the day. But it's like, oh, well, I'm scheduled to pick up the kids and take them to this practice, and then we need to do X, Y, or Z. And that became very anxiety inducing for me and difficult. So what I sort of did is applied for a couple of like sales internship situations, and I got one or two of those, and I really kind of just soaked up as much as I could, and it was very temp oriented. And in working in those sales environments, I sort of saw that like other people working both in revenue operations or sales ops or in the sales roles themselves, it's not like their sort of backgrounds or skill sets were that much more vast than mine was. And it really just took kind of what I was saying before of like an open-mindedness, a desire to learn, an ability to think on your feet, like all of these things that I'd cultivated in grad school and also in your acting career, because you have to be able to collaborate with your fellow actors, the director, sometimes the designers, sometimes obviously the writers, etc. So I was very comfortable in that that environment. And so I sort of started out supporting sales development in that capacity, and that sort of pivoted to me being more strictly on a RevOps team and working with account both post sale and pre-sale, and all of the operations and KPIs and reporting and strategy involved in that. And from that, that's when I sort of was able to leverage that into working at Wix. And we were talking a bit about this, where when the pandemic sort of happened and hit, that's right when I started at Wix, basically. So there was no acting work, no other, I don't want to say that's a distraction, but there was no where else really for me to be putting my time and my energy and my emphasis. So I was able to really flesh out a lot of the like minutia skills, and especially when it comes to Salesforce and building things and developing things in there, the more technical knowledge and being able to speak that language that the developers have, in addition to the strategy things and a bit more of the high level abilities there. So I feel very fortunate that the timing worked out the way it did, but that I've been working at Wix now for 3 years. I've been really able to grow and scale my career there, which has been fantastic, based on the mentors I've met along the way, but also specifically at Wix. There's one person in particular I work with who's really taught me a ton, who I'm sure I'll mention later. Her name's Melanie Terranova, and she is fantastic as a RevOps pro. And yeah, that's just been great. But that's my story up until now, basically.
Yeah, that's
Great.
fantastic. And I think it's interesting too, right? Like you realizing like you know, it's that fine balance of like I've got this dream of wanting to be an actor, right? But like that practical side too. And I think that even dovetails into like you kind of want to have both in your role in RevOps, right? Like you want to have kind of like that thinking out of the box a little bit, not being fully anchored to one thing. So it's kind of interesting that you've got, I think your brain thinks in both different ways, which is probably a very unique skill set, right?
Yeah, and I think like that's where, I'm sure we'll get into this later, but I do think specifically with I'm thinking Salesforce, or even just like normal ways of thinking about things, where it's a lot of times black and white. I found that's like a language or a jumping off point, and then the how, or the way in which if you're presenting a deck or data or something, where it's like you're trying to drive a specific result in theory, or there's like a specific objective. And that's something that is shared in acting too, where it's like, what do I want in this scene? What does my character want? And that's what I think about in both in selling strategies of like, okay, I as a rep want to help the person I'm talking to or the business that I'm talking to succeed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't tell them straight up that like our product, our solution does this. They
Mm-hmm.
need to sort of
Yeah.
come to that realization on their own. So it's like, and same within when I'm a character, their objective. It's like you can't just flat out say what you want. It's how you go about getting what you want, and how you can make the other person think about things in a new and interesting light that ultimately drives you to that end result or that end objective. So that's where
Yeah.
it's like, in all things, I think that's a very relevant skill set of thinking, not just straightforward, which you always sort of need, but
Mm-hmm.
like, if I want to drive a certain result, I don't just want to tell them this is the result I want all the time. If I lay
Mm-hmm.
it out in a proper way and in the best way possible, and I build a story with the deck I'm presenting and the data, and what I'm choosing to show in which order, in which way, then the only decision they can logically reach, if I do it correctly, is the one that I want them to make, essentially.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that's where, like, when you're playing a character and you're dissecting a
Yeah.
script, and you're like, what does my character want in this scene? What does my character want in life? They're
Mm-hmm.
always trying to drive towards that end goal. And
Right.
it's not explicitly said. And I think ultimately that the how of it is what I'm always sort of fascinated by. And it also like expands to stakeholders internally, like when it comes to
Yeah.
operationalizing even like adoption of a process or something, where
Right.
it's like sometimes TLs or directors care about saving time, right? Sometimes they care about, does this bring revenue to our company? Sometimes does this increase our sentiment score or like our customer engagement or whatever it might be? Thinking about all of those things as the end goal, and then how you cater to that of like, oh, not only does this save you time, but it also proves our worth to the company as a whole, or like this specific team as a KPI. And maybe it's not necessarily related to comp, but it helps prove that like X leads to Y. And that might not be something that is explicitly part of the goal, but it also then proves like, oh, my team also adds value in a way that like you weren't even thinking about this, and any way that I can make you look better and provide even more insight into what we're ultimately trying to drive towards is great. So I do think that out of the box sort of thinking, and not that
Yeah.
people aren't always thinking about this stuff too, but
Yeah.
that's been very helpful, and I think is an interesting through line that I found in both acting and RevOps, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, it's super fascinating. I think, especially I work with a lot of RevOps professionals as well, and I think, yeah, like they kind of grew up the ranks and they think about things not to completely put everyone in a box, but to the
Sure.
point they don't have kind of a different perspective like you bring to the table, and
Mhm.
especially thinking about you're dealing, I have to imagine, with a bunch of different stakeholders where everyone wants a different thing, right? So how do you empathetically approach everyone in a different way? It sounds like, your background has really lended you to that in that capacity.
Yeah, and then I think too of that understanding that like we're all sort of cogs in a wheel to a
Mm,
degree, and to be able to
mhm,
zoom out and see the whole wheel is also very important too. I think like
mhm.
director, there's a reason that like in theater that title is also shared in tech. I think that's
Yeah.
like a skill set that I have directed productions before, and I've also acted in them and tried to do that simultaneously, where it's like
Oh,
sometimes knowing your role and your function, and I think even defining that or your relationships to certain teams is also super important. And like
sure.
what is this team responsible versus this team, and making sure that we're not creating, or that we are creating redundancies, and that we're not doubling our efforts, so that we can like, make sure we're using our time to the best of our, just basic stuff like that too.
Right.
Found super helpful. But yeah, the empathy thing, I think that's super important too, to a degree. Like it all makes sense, I think, where it's cut and dry of what are our goals, what are our KPIs, like how do we get,
Mhm,
as like TLs or reps, like how do we just get paid, and that's
mhm,
really their incentive, that's their goal.
mhm.
But there are other things that like, yeah, of course we have to facilitate that part of this, but like ease of use, saving them time, really like making things and only presenting things to them, and pushing to production that are really great and tight and awesome all the time is
Mhm.
also huge, in that like, oh, when you do introduce something that's really like kind of a pain ultimately for them to adopt, it gives them inherently more buy-in, and they
Sure.
understand that like you're looking out for them and their best interests. So
Right.
it's like they're not always combative of like, oh,
Right.
RevOps is saying we have to do this thing, or this is now added into our deal desk process. It's like another approval that we have to do. But it's like, if everything you try and present is in the best interest of them, or at least you're
Mm,
coming from that place, I think
yeah.
they're inherently more reactive and adoptive to kind of our priorities as well, and
Yeah.
which are more like wheel oriented sometimes and not always cog oriented, and that's
Yeah.
difficult. But yeah, so trying to find that balance, and I do think the empathy of understanding TL's problems and directors' problems and reps' problems VPs, like it's all super important as well. And that's where, like, in acting, you're never supposed to judge a character you're playing. And I
Hmm.
think that's what I've learned to do too, of like everyone's just trying to do their job, make sure that
Yeah.
like they're proving their worth and helping enable their team and everything. So understanding is such a huge part of what we do. And I think understanding your customer, but like a lot of
Right.
times for RevOps specifically, your customers are also internal stakeholders
Internal.
in the company and in the business. So
Right.
yeah.
Which are probably tougher than your external
Yeah,
customers half the
exactly.
time,
There's immediate
right?
feedback there all the time. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's and it sounds so simple the way that you put it, right? But I think that I mean, that's just such a skill that I think not everyone possesses, and I think that has to be a reason why you've continued to grow in your success at Wix is having that empathy, right? And approaching it from a different angle in a way that before we said was very black and white. So super super interesting. And I'm thinking too, like even you're talking about there's some changes you probably have had to enact across, your role and the different stakeholders. Is there anything else that kind of sticks out as far as like effectively presenting that and engaging in conversations that lead to a positive way, or that are super positive and constructive?
Yeah, I think like there's a couple of things that we've built um, in house, like especially with our. So we have at Wix we have some like success management teams where it's like they're really dealing with like partners and users that are inherently like they're customers. They're going to be customers if we manage them or not.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of them, and that's where it's like, okay, what can we actually add that like our success management is an asset to any of these partners and these
I see.
users. And
Mm-hmm.
and part of that is like we need to think about, okay, what does this org provide Wix as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of which, isn't revenue is a part of it, but that's not everything. Like we are talking to partners and users in the way that like no one else is. And
Mm-hmm.
there's supplemental data that we can gather that you're not going to be able to get from people's dashboards and the behavior that they're sort of like what they're engaging with within the platform and sort of those normal black and white sort of data points that we're always sort of looking at to see,
Sure.
okay, what maybe marketing emails can we be sending them about certain products or things like that. But when you actually get these people on the phone, how do we take that all of these conversations we're having, all of these emails we're having, all of these like feature requests that we're now submitting and feedback that we're getting about products and how people are using these things and how they're building their sites, what problems they're sort of encountering. How do we put that into data for Wix to then use and decide, do they want to invest all this money into like pivoting this one product into a new solution or building other feature requests on top of what we have? Like that is inherently a value add that we can provide not only Wix but our customers as well.
Right.
And that's not something that's inherently like money, sort of
Sure.
those more black and white post sale goals where it's like, oh, upsell,
Mm-hmm.
renew subscription, whatever it might be.
Sure.
And so that's where it's like, as RevOps, that's all a bit more like it's kind of like activity data and some of those more like like loose. You have some certain not necessarily KPIs, but ways to measure all of those things. But then how do you formulate that and put that into something that Wix can use ultimately? So
Right.
we've created a couple of tools that's really just like one interface that a rep can log into Salesforce every day, and it shows them certain things that they like, certain partners or users are maybe eligible for, or would be a good use case to try out X, Y, or Z product or adopt certain X, Y, or Z product. And then it's like after that happens, we're able to, in our sort of business analytics way, see like, are we driving the desired impact that we're trying to drive? So whether that is, like I said, product adoption, or whether that is sort of increasing traffic or collections for one of the partner sites, or a user's even just like a specific page on their site, like all of these like search engine optimization ad campaigns that they're running, it's really kind of a whole, not just helping them with bugs, but like actually being a part of them growing their business, where it's
Yeah.
like a lot of gray area, like what is our impact here, taking that gray area and putting into like finite data points
Yeah.
into their workflow on a daily basis, like, and as much as RevOps can automate that. So it's like stamping certain things that happen, or putting in
Sure.
checkboxes in Salesforce that like we're collecting on the back end, and it doesn't add extra work to the rep's day, is
Right. Yeah. That's
huge,
awesome.
right? Because it's like, we don't want to have them have to do manual administrative work. And we do
Mm-hmm.
want to support them to track the whatever the rep is doing, and then compiling that in such a way that says to Wix, like, wow, on an aggregate, like super high level, this team is doing really interesting stuff. And it's not just revenue based, it's also insights on our users, insights on feature requests that we can like change our platform, spin off new teams, do whatever we need to do. And that's not something we can just gather based off of like the partner is like logging in, or the partner is building a site. And like, these are the more, yeah, things that I'm sort of interested in, and I've found specifically in Wix's environment that I'd never really thought of prior to coming here. And part of that is just the offering of Wix to
Mm-hmm.
begin with. But yeah, it's fascinating. It was a very long-winded answer. I don't know if that was helpful.
Yeah, no, it's awesome, and it's cool. Everything is rooted in data, whether it's you trying to, use that information to grow your own business and what product lines you should be focusing on, and help, your partners and your different customers grow their business. Like you get to kind of have
And
the
then
full.
also like, exactly, like for the teams, like what works, like
Right, exactly.
what are ways in which one team that has sort of like a completely different outreach strategy, or even like purpose and KPI, what can they learn from this other team in terms of like outreach strategies, or ways in which to
Right.
engage with users, whether that be, webinars, office hours, the content that they're sending them, the kind of,
Yeah.
that's also super helpful too, we found. And as much as you can base that in data, I think
Right.
it, because then you can compare like have those more traditional KPIs, which is like performance on X or performance on Y.
Right.
But yeah,
Right. That's awesome. And it sounds like Wix to a degree can pivot, right? Like you're still pretty agile, even though you're a massive company. I mean, maybe I'm
yes,
just putting that out there, but it
no,
sounds like that's really the
it
case.
feels very much like a startup within, that has like the resources of a publicly traded company. That's really
Yeah.
good. And that's what's great. And I do think they kind of harness that spirit, even top to bottom, like C-level to down to me, and I think like the best ideas, they really want to pursue that. So I've
Hmm.
noticed that, especially within our like sales organization here in the US, is like, even based off of one interesting data point of certain users, we've like spun off entire sales teams and efforts to like pursue
Really?
that. And that's what's really kind of cool, is that if it's a good idea, Wix is always interested in pursuing it. And it just feels like a very collaborative and cultivating environment for that specifically, so that like people always feel empowered to kind of come up with these interesting, cool new initiatives, and then we
Yeah.
try them out. And I think that's a great worlds in which to operate. And I love companies when they sort of empower everyone to just produce the best ideas possible.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And it's like you read my mind. I had a question, even just thinking about, because your business straddles B2B and B2C. Even within your role, are you focusing on both sides? Is there one where you're one? Because even just understanding like resource allocation, especially we've heard at
Yeah.
least in companies like B2B doesn't get as much love, or how do you balance that resource allocation, and just what does that look like?
Yeah, so I would say like I do both. And the way we're sort of set up is we kind of have people who own certain verticals within B2C or B2B. And so I'm kind of, like I said, I own verticals in both, and B2B for Wix is on the newer side. So just in terms of, not like there's not resources there, but I think just because it's been priority for a shorter period of time, yeah, I would say like allocation of resources is just stronger on the B2C side. But all that to say, we have, so one of our verticals is channels, which we sort of like, we have partnerships with, Vista and some of these other companies where their users are able to set up a site through Wix, and we do
Interesting.
these sort of like bigger deals to help other companies empower their users through Wix's like premium subscriptions, and being able to like build a site that is immediately going to be awesome, very
Mhm.
small lift, etc.
That's awesome.
We also have a point of sale system. I guess it's just a POS, but yeah, because I'm saying point of sale. Yeah, okay. I didn't sleep much last night, but what I'm saying is that like that is a way to not only help our users, like our beta, more of a internal, like our current user base, because
Mhm.
if they're using our store's product and they have a physical location, that's a great opportunity for them to just have an end-to-end solution and not need to
Right.
use a Square or something else. And then that's just like an added, and we do have integrations, but if you can keep it all in a more closed loop system, it just
Yeah.
inherently helps the user
Mm.
be able to have a more seamless sort of process. But there's
Mhm.
also opportunity there as well, similar to that channel, where it's like, or channels vertical that I was saying before, of people who already have a retail location and are transitioning from having a retail location to like
Interesting. Yeah.
becoming a more online business. It's like
Yeah.
that is a perfect way to have partnerships with referral partners or resellers, where like when they're setting up their site, there's also a POS option for them that creates this whole ecosystem immediately
Mhm.
right off the bat, so they can hit the ground running in their web presence. And I think like that's super exciting. It's super interesting.
Right.
It also is a mixture of both of those things, where you're making a business also like a user now too. So all that to say, like we're prioritizing everything all at once, and we're giving resources to everything all at once. And it's interesting, kind of what I was saying before, of like, oh, this team has a completely different KPI and even purpose. But what they're doing, and like even what we're tracking in Salesforce or the tools we built for that team, is super applicable to this B2B team that's like just starting it. So like us as a RevOps team specifically, really there's a lot of, we're so intertwined, both in like ways in which we think about things, but also do such a great job. And this is a shout out to my mentor, who I've sort of mentioned her before, but she does such a great job of like, oh, if this is a good idea for this one team, there's a use case over here that even
Yeah.
though there's a completely different purpose and it's like territories are different or like, yeah, like I said, what they're doing is so vastly across this canyon.
Yeah.
The way to support them is the exact same, right? And
Yeah.
that's super great. And I think we've created a great environment and go between there, which has been
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. And it's awesome being able to see the big picture while also being in the weeds is a big, kind of a really big,
right. Yeah,
I
exactly.
think
Like you
balance,
did.
right? But the fact you guys can do that, that's awesome. And super unique business model just in general, even with like your point of sale system, your POS, and then having websites too. I mean, it's, it feels very all encompassing, especially now, in this world, everyone wants efficiency. They want one-stop shop. So the fact that Wix is catering to that, I'm sure you've heard it from so many of your different customers that you're developing those products to make
Yeah,
their lives easier is really cool.
exactly. And yeah, exactly. That's it's so cool when a user we're managing has an idea and they're like, this part of this product, let's say, I just really wish it could do X, or I really wish it could do Y. And
Mm,
like I said, we're not able to necessarily gather that from their dashboard or what they're doing, but if we have a conversation with them and we're able to like put that into hard data that we can give to these product teams at Wix, and they're like, oh, that's actually an incredible thing. And they put it on the roadmap and the user can actually see their impact of the product. That's
yeah,
like super rewarding. And I
yeah,
love that Wix is very interested in like just listening to their customer base. Cause it's like, that's really, I mean, as any business would know, that's such a huge part of it, is like catering to your current customers and really making them feel like they're not only growing their business, but they're having like an input a little
right.
bit on the outcome of the products that they're using. That's super cool. And
Yeah. And just develops that loyalty because these people may, whether they own their own business or are starting a new business, they're going to continue to go
yeah,
back to, what they know is a product
exactly.
that they can trust over time. So that's awesome. And I've got just a few more questions for you and then I'll let you go. This has been really cool. So it's pivoting gears a little bit. We'll talk, you can give us your unsolicited feedback, but I think good read. Is there any like book or blog or newsletter? You probably have a very unique perspective on this, or video that you would recommend to our listeners that you.
Yeah. I this is kind of my pocket answer, and I know I've done a couple of other podcasts, and this is kind of what I always answer this question with. There's a book that I really like that is both for interesting for acting and for business and kind of what we do in general. It's this book called The Power of Habit, and it's basically what it does is it goes through, I think it's like 10 examples of habits, both like how it talks about how we develop habits, what they are, both personally but also like as organizations or
Hmm.
institutions. So like just a couple of examples. One is their King's Cross station. There was a fire that sort of happened. I think it was early 1800s. If this is wrong, it's more of a
We
fucking
won't fact
my
check you
inability
here.
to remember things. But it tells this story of basically there was some, maybe it was a janitor, maybe it was just sort of a security guard who saw a tissue that was like burning on fire, and he basically just went and collected the tissue, put out the tissue, and threw it away. And because organizationally at that time, or as part of the station, it was not clear, like he was just tasked with picking up that thing that was on fire and throwing it away. He was
Mhm.
not tasked with communicating that this thing that was on fire, he didn't need to communicate that to his superior, who was then supposed to communicate it to. So that's like, an example of, and basically what happened is it led to this sort of horrific fire that ended up killing a bunch of people. But it's the more sort of specific example that's brought up in the book is there's this organization, or this company, I think it's Alcoa is the name of it. It's like it's a steel company, or it does something on those lines. And basically this CEO was brought in to kind of like grow this company and make it much more profitable. And he was sort of looking at like, okay, what are these things called keystone behaviors that if I target this behavior, all of these other things that we're trying to solve will actually inherently start to improve. And you can't address everything at once. And but
Right.
if I address the keystone habit, then it will inform all these other bad habits that we have. So his
Yeah.
keystone habit that he sort of targeted was, let's make sure that we're the safest company out there. So there's no incidents, and all of our communications around incidents need to be 100% accurate. The SLAs for that, everything, we need to prioritize making sure that we're the safest company possible. And what happened is by inherently like overemphasizing that and making sure that like everyone did their due diligence all the time and focusing on this thing, it started to bleed into like other areas of the company where that became the standard of like, I need to do my due diligence all the time and be on top of
Yeah.
my work and whatever. And as a result, the company became more successful, the market cap grew. And so it identifies that both on a personal level and
Yeah.
organizational level. Maybe those examples aren't the best ones in the book, but I
Oh,
thought it was fascinating of like, you can't solve everything all the time all at once, but what is one thing that you can control and address, and that will then start to be able to address everything else all at once. I found that fascinating, and I think it's a really interesting read. A lot of diverse examples of that throughout, but yeah,
that's
I
great. I'm taking that down. I could use that both personally and professionally. I've got young
yeah,
children at home, so you can't
I,
tackle it all at once, right? And same with work. It's that sounds awesome. So thanks for sharing that recommendation for our reader, or for our for our guests as well. And then one other question before I let you go. So, anyone that you would like, names of inspirational people within the space that you've worked with, or that you would recommend, like specifically maybe in B2B, that you would recommend that we bring on
yeah,
to?
yeah. So I mentioned Melanie Terranova, who works at Wix with me. I've been working with her for 3 years. She's been putting up with me for 3 years. Let's call She's incredible and has taught me so much and has just a great brain for all of this, both from the like sales and customer retention, account management strategy side of it, but also just like being able to be in the weeds while simultaneously being super high level. Her, my a couple of my I worked at JW Player, and there's a couple people there who I really love and respect and think are rock stars. Not to use a cliche word, but Dwani Dalal and Meg Goach are both incredible revenue operations and sales operations and strategy sort of minds, in terms of like just being able to see the whole picture beginning to
Sure.
end and all the things in between. I just think they're incredible and very smart. And
Awesome.
yeah, that's who I'd say.
Noted, noted. Well, thanks so much, Christian. And I guess, how can people get in touch with you after the podcast? I mean, clearly we know you're on Netflix, so everyone will be hustling over to watch you there, but where else can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I think my Instagram has my link tree. I don't know if my LinkedIn has my link tree, but that has all of my acting stuff and contact information and whatever. You could also just, I think if you Google me, it'll all come up somewhere. But
We can find
yeah,
you.
No, I'm always interested in expanding my network, and like it's been so lovely meeting you and having conversations with you. I just love talking about this stuff. Also, from the standpoint of it just helps me. Like it's that thinking outside of the box thing. The more people I meet, the more perspective I get on what I do and what the possibilities are there. So this has been another one of those examples. So I really just appreciate being able to meet you and talk with you. This has been so great.
Yeah, no, this is super interesting. And we really appreciate you sharing your story, your knowledge, your background. I think this will be, one that everyone just wants to learn more about. I'm sure people will be, finding you and reaching out as well, just because I think it's an inspiration, especially for people where you're thinking about, this is my career. This is what I'm going to want to do. I think all of us know that our lives take different twists and turns. So hearing kind of where you are and balancing both different, dreams that you have is just an amazing story. So we appreciate you joining today on the podcast, and I hope to stay in touch as well. And best of luck as you guys finish out the year at Wix, and as things continue to change on the acting front as well.
Yeah, thank you so much again. And this has been so great. So here's to a
Awesome.
great Q4, right?
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Sunny Side Up. If you liked what you heard, please rate and review us and subscribe to our show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you consume podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube and Demandbase TV.